Hello and bonjour to everyone, and happy Pride Month. My name is Kim Woofard. My pronouns are she, her, ed. I'm the manager of the Belonging Engagement Team at Engineers Canada and also serve as the president of the Canadian Coalition for Women in Engineering, Science, Trades, and Technology. It brings me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Allyship in Engineering, Amplifying 2SLGBTQI+ Voices and Driving Positive Change. I'd like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. I myself am a settler on these lands. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples that call this land home. June marks two important national observances in Canada, National Indigenous History Month and Pride Month, offering a valuable opportunity to reflect, learn, and stand in solidarity with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people, as well as 2SLGBTQIA+ communities across the country. These two observances have a few important things in common. Mainly, they aren't just about awareness. They are ongoing stories of resistance, resurgence, and love. When we do land acknowledgements, we like to include a reflection. And in preparation of today, I started to reflect on the 2S in particular. And one of the things that I discovered that I'd like to share with you is that long before European contact, many Indigenous nations across what we now call North America embraced gender and sexual diversity. People who lived outside the binary roles of man and woman held respected roles as knowledge keepers, healers, and leaders. Their existence was deeply rooted in community, culture, and spirit. But colonization, and with it Christianity, residential schools, and the Indian Act, imposed rigid gender norms that violently disrupted these traditional understandings. And in the 1990s, during a powerful gathering near Winnipeg, the term two-spirited was shared in a dream by a Cree elder named Myra Laramie. It quickly became a movement, a reclamation of identity, culture, and self-determination for 2SLGBTQI+ Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the effects of residential schools and colonialism on Indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we can, each in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As we dive into today's webinar, I want to wish you all a happy Pride Month. Pride is a time to celebrate the 2SLGBTQI+ community, their accomplishments, their resilience and resistance, and their strength. The engineering profession benefits from the contributions of this community who work all throughout the profession. However, there's still a great deal of work to be done to ensure that this community feels welcomed in the profession while being their authentic selves. Engineers Canada is the National Association of Provincial and Territorial Engineering Regulators that license the more than 320,000 members of the engineering profession across Canada. As the national voice of the engineering profession, one of Engineers Canada's core purposes is to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in a profession that reflects Canadian society. That's why we're happy to host this Pride Month conversation about allyship in engineering and drive positive change to make the engineering community welcoming and safe for all. And we are thrilled that TD Insurance has partnered with us on today's event. TD Insurance has proudly served members of Engineers Canada for over 51 years by providing preferred insurance rates on cars, homes, condos, and tenant coverage, and is part of Canada's long-term sponsorship program. TD Insurance is proud to support Engineers Canada efforts to increase equity, diversity, and inclusion in the profession, and TD continues to champion diversity and inclusion in all aspects of their business. I'd now like to turn the virtual floor over to Jove Nazatul, our moderator for today's discussion. Jove is a queer, trans, non-binary immigrant of color. Jove champions underrepresented groups in the trades and was the first trans, non-binary person elected to the board of directors of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. As a performance artist and producer, Jove works to create platforms for the QT and was named a changemaker by Pride at Work Canada in 2024. So congratulations, Jove. As a project coordinator for the Canadian Coalition of Women in Engineering, Science, Trades, and Technology, or CCWESST, Jove is focused on creating psychologically safe workplaces for everyone. Jove, over to you.
Thank you, Kim. I would like to start today just by introducing our panelists for the event. Um, we'll start with introducing Julia Duhamel, the Senior Manager Public Cloud Compute for TD Bank Group. Vanessa Raponi, the founder and manager of EngiQueers, Manager Manufacturing Engineer Spin Master. And Tim Joseph, Principal Engineer, JPI Mine Equipment and Engineering, Engineers Canada Board Member, and 30 by 30 Board Champion. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm gonna jump right into it because we have a short period of time and a lot of salient things to say, I'm sure. I'm gonna kick us off by asking the question, what does allyship mean to you? And I'm gonna take some time to answer it from my perspective. I think the best way that I understand allyship is borrowing an analogy that I've heard through anti-racism training. So I think that allyship, I think as most people understand, allyship is a verb. Um, if we consider allyship or, if we consider injustice as a moving sidewalk, and we're all on the moving sidewalk. Some of us are walking quicker towards injustice and towards behaviors that exhibit homophobia, transphobia, racism. But I think a bulk of us are on the moving sidewalk, but not maybe doing anything. So we are allowing some of these things to happen around us. We're not speaking up in the moment. We're not being an active ally in those situations. We are still moving towards injustice whether we want to or not. I think, when we talk about racism specifically, we talk about anti-racism. And I think this is the conversation that I think we need to bring to all forms of injustice, including homophobia and transphobia. I think the bigger thing that we need to be doing as allies, or I mean allies need to be doing, is we need to be walking against the grain. So we need to be walking away from the injustice. And that is a constant effort, a constant movement. Anytime you stop, you're moving further away from where you, I think, ought to be as an ally. So I'm gonna ask Julia, um, what does allyship mean to you?
Thank you so much, Jove. So just to introduce myself quickly, name is Julia Duhamel. I work as a senior manager with TD Bank in our infrastructure space, managing public cloud services. To me, allyship really, it means being aware of barriers or challenges that may be present for some peers and helping to create a space where everyone feels welcome. For instance, a colleague's input may be overlooked repeatedly in meetings with a team. Maybe someone doesn't feel included in social events. Maybe they experience even more overt discrimination. It's so common for people to not speak up when these things are happening, and allyship means being observant, speaking with those affected to get their perspective and see if there's anything that you can do to help. Most importantly, though, allyship really means when you're in doubt, don't make assumptions. Talk with those people, talk with them directly, and better understand their perspective and what help they want or need.
Thank you, Julia. Tim, how about you?
Well, thank you so much, Jove. Again, I'll introduce myself. My name is Tim Joseph. My pronouns are he, him. I've been an educator, a practitioner as an engineer. I'm a parent, and I've been in these roles for as long as I can remember. I'm obviously the oldest person on the call today. And for the last 45 years, as a practitioner and as an educator, and half of those years as a parent, I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, Two Spirit and AI friends. And so through that, for me, allyship is more than just, and I think we've said it already, Jove, you said it very well about the moving walkway, it's more about taking action than it is just being a bystander. And so, yes, being supportive, being that person that can mentor, being that person that can be there, be that set of ears that listen and understand and give voice and give presence and give recognition. Those are very important. But I think being an ally is more than that. Being an ally is taking action. It's taking a stand. It is advocating for change and finding ways in which we can create pathways so that individuals can have successful lives and careers unfettered by any interaction on the outside.
Thank you, Tim. Vanessa, how about yourself?
Thanks all for inviting me to this panel. So for me, I my thoughts on this have really evolved over the last decade or so. As the founder of EngiQueers Canada, when we first started our journey a long time ago, I had a bit more optimism of where kind of we were in society, what moment we were in. And it felt like a moment of before and after of we've gotten into this, queer trans utopia of inclusion. Racism is being talked about publicly, really explicitly. And it felt like allyship was getting to a point of my expectation is that you're Googling stuff in your spare time, you're putting a lot of ownership and attention into people who don't look like you, aren't a part of your community, and you're really focused on helping, or maybe not focused, but it is a priority for you to help those other people thrive. I think given where we are at in society now, more rapidly in the last few months, things feel different, candidly. I think there's new levels of lack of psychological safety for individuals in all different walks of life, where the priority is looking kind of more inward or to one's immediate family, immediate community. So if by chance you don't know a lot of queer folks, don't know a lot of trans folks, that can easily feel a few steps disconnected from you and your space, and it might not be a core priority for you right now. So what I would say is my new sort of wave of hope or optimism with where things are at right now is holding on to as much of the progress we got to in these last handful of years, so that we don't lose it entirely in all elements, and we keep sort of some of that more negativity or hate or intolerance to a smaller community, or as minimally systemically impacting as possible. So I think some examples of what I would love to see allyship to look like today, I think it is comfortable for me if it's increasingly private, like one-on-one interactions or small spaces, small community, or small workplace collaborations or events. I think it's a lot of what is shared in closed door spaces about, advocating for people to get different promotions or things of those nature, context and nature in a workforce standpoint. But given where things are at in a larger societal lens, I think it also looks like sending emails to your representatives to make sure your voice is being heard, that this is not an ideology you support and would like to continue to see, laws and regulations following that more inclusive, train of thought. And ultimately, I do think from a corporate standpoint, there still exists things like EngiQueers and spaces for queer and trans folks or folks of color or various intersectional lenses, that still can have financial support to provide a sense of community and camaraderie during these times, and a lot of things that have existed for a long time that are in a new threat of not having financial support right now. I know Pride Toronto is highlighted they've lost about $700,000 of sponsorship so far. So it's a weird and wonderful time in EDI, not so wonderful, weird time. And I think this is a time more than ever, of course, for action. And just, but I feel like it's a time of a bit more grace for folks to do their best given the complexities of everything happening right now.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Yeah, I think, I think in general, kind of summing up what was said is that allyship takes many forms, and there are many levels of allyship, right? So there is that personal allyship, there is allyship in the workplace, and there's also systemic allyship. So, I think there are ways in which we all can help one another, and be active allies. I think the big one is, yes, active allyship. That means sometimes going out of your way to um, ally with the 2S LGBTQ plus QIA community. My next question is specifically for Julia. So, Julia, what do you think distinguishes performative allyship from active allyship?
Absolutely, Jove. So expanding on my earlier comments, active allyship really does mean actively observing when peers face challenges, whether it's due to gender, sexuality, ethnicity, or other aspects of themselves. It means having those conversations with individuals when they appear to be facing these challenges and how best to support them rather than waiting for concerns to be raised. But companies can also proactively work to address a lot of challenges faced by employees or customers from different communities. The formation of ERGs, or employee resource groups, allows employees to get together to discuss common issues that impact them. For instance, at TD, we have the Forever Proud ERG, where 2SLGBTQ+ employees and allies across the bank can join to discuss these issues and ways to improve awareness and understanding. Another critical aspect, though, of these ERGs is building support and/or sponsorship from leaders across the organization, including allies. This opens the door for networking, for mentoring opportunities, community volunteering to show an organization's support in a tangible way, and to host events for the organization to spread awareness. It builds opportunities for employees from underrepresented communities to grow as leaders within the organization when managers support their staff's efforts in these initiatives. In many cases, people outside a given community, they may not be aware of how historic practices or processes within that company may make some individuals feel excluded. And by creating those safe spaces for employees to raise an issue as a community and not just as an individual, organizations can really give a voice to those employees and ultimately attract and retain much more diverse talent for their workforce. But ultimately, the goal of these efforts should be to improve fairness and inclusivity when it comes to career development opportunities across all employees. In terms of showing up and showing support for members of the 2SLGBTQ+ community, TD in particular has been highly visible and has made diversity a key part of its brand. TD has been involved with Pride Toronto since 2005 and has since supported and participated in dozens of Pride-related festivals across North America. And in fact, we were actually one of the first Canadian bank to do so. Internally, we've had official networks and ERGs for Pride for the last 20 years. And over the last 30 years, we've gradually added more and more support for 2SLGBTQ+ employees regarding benefits plans. TD was actually one of the first North American banks to offer same-sex spousal benefits back in 1994. And over time, we've continued to expand benefits to items such as family planning, surrogacy support, and many gender transition-related expenses. In a climate where we see so many companies pulling back on DEI initiatives, TD continues to make this a core part of their brand as we understand the value that diversity brings to the workforce. So just to kind of summarize all of that, there are many ways that organizations can support and show up and demonstrate active allyship. But really, it starts with encouraging and fostering a culture of listening to members of all communities, taking meaningful steps to address their shared concerns, as well as any unique challenges they may face, and showing customers and employees that diversity is a valued part of their business.
Thank you so much, Julia. I think with ERGs, especially as you were speaking about it, I think there is a safety in numbers, right? There is a safety in being surrounded by the people who have intersections that match yours. I do think that, often in male-dominated workspaces, especially where they're maybe lacking in 2S LGBTQ folks, it's a lot of feeling alone. And I think companies that do encourage ERGs to exist are really helping their workers connect with one another in a way that's not just about the work, right? I think we all want to bring our full selves to the workplace, and I think I think that is a good segue kind of into the next question. We all want to bring our full selves to the workplace, but what are some examples of stereotypes or microaggressions that you've seen within engineering? And how do you think such ideologies contribute to an unwelcoming profession for 2S LGBTQ plus folks? Do you think it's unique to engineering? I am not an engineer. I am a tradesperson by trade. And so my experience might be slightly different. I think there's still a lot of overlap just because of the male-dominated aspect of the industry. I think, engineering has a much better split compared to trades. We have 5% women. That's the only kind of stat that we kind of keep. Compared to engineering, I think you're at 20% right now, which is, where we aspire to be. But I think some of the microaggressions that I experience on the work site is because of how I present. I think a lot of the men that I work with um, disregard my trans identity. They kind of see me as one of the boys, which gives me a little bit of a layer of privilege and a little bit of protection because they just see me as one of them. But that also serves to delegitimize my experience and the hardships that I've gone through in order to exist as the person that I am. Would anyone else like to answer this question? Tim?
Sure, I can jump in a little bit, I think. You know, one thing that really stands out for me is the exclusionary sense that you pick up in industry. And it's not just engineering, it's everywhere. And when teams are formed for a particular project or there is an event that is being organized, those teams tend to center on people who look like themselves. And so the actual action of not inviting someone to be part of a team, not inviting them to find the opportunity to find advancement, and just because of that passive exclusionary process, that is a microaggression. And it's very, very obvious when you start to look at this from the outside. One thing that's become very apparent for me is, in these recent months, the last year or more, with these political changes south of the border and how that's impacting the rest of the world, and the statements that are coming out about lessening the attention to EDI and to marginalized individuals within the landscape, that seems to affect businesses, and it affects engineering as much as anywhere else within Canada. And this is where courage needs to come in. Engineers are supposed to be professionals. We are supposed to be professionals. I like to think that I'm a professional, and I try to live up to that. And part of that is having the courage to stand up and say, something is wrong, and we're going to stand up against it. And so when we see that there is aggression towards EDI in general, and there is a sense that this is not good business, it totally is completely against everything we've worked for. And people should be believing that diversity within a business creates success. And that's really where we can build on these things. And I think one of the ways in which we can combat some of these microaggressions is definitely educational, but it's how we actually carry ourselves and we actually act within those businesses. So when we see things that are not quite as they should be, people are being curt with each other. They're being very short in terms of their sentences, their responses, their communications. Those are all microaggressions. And so we want these to be welcoming workspaces that people will want to become an engineer. We don't want to drive people away. We want to welcome people in. And as you said, Jove, I mean, we're around that 20% mark. But again, it's how we count the numbers. If we actually count the actual physical numbers of women and marginalized individuals that are actually entering the engineering profession, it is going up year after year after year. It's not stagnant. But when you compare it to the proportion of men that are actually entering the profession, it actually seems as though it's stagnant. It's how we count the numbers. And we talk about this all the time in Engineers Canada. But I think that's also a signal that we have more individuals within our community that are willing to stand up and be courageous and say, I'm not going anywhere. And that I'm going to be here to make sure that we do create those welcoming spaces for the next generation and the people that are going to come after me. So I think talking about the microaggressions is very important, identifying what they are, finding ways in which we can be educational to help businesses and professions understand this is not a solution in ignoring something. Actually tackling it head on will create greater diversity and greater business success. It's putting a business case to what we want to see in terms of a direction for our community. And I think that's very important in terms of combating some of those things.
Thank you, Tim. Vanessa, I feel you have something to say about this as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you about the examples that you've shared. I think what's relatively unique to engineering is how male dominated it is for sure. What's also unique to engineering is how broad it is, how many sectors we're working in, how many different types of engineering there are. So in some ways that creates a lot of unique challenges to be able to unify a specific way of working or way of being. One thing I've really observed in more manufacturing heavy environments is it the microaggressions truly are very assumption based, like, um, oh, or you're the project manager, or you don't have certain technical skills, or this role is a stretch role for you, even though you objectively have the technical and requirements to meet a certain role. So I think what is necessary is really those allies to come in and help vocalize what I was saying earlier about, like, it's so much of like the private spaces or the small spaces. I think that's where like it's where you're going to see, like, at a town hall or something, like, I'm going to vocalize this microaggression to a group of 300 people. But if it's just in a team meeting of just, dismissing someone's ideas, I liked, Tim, how you highlighted so much about like the silence or the short words, like when you're witnessing those types of things, speaking out in those moments and redirecting the focus to that person, or saying, oh, actually that idea I think is what so and so just said, and highlighting those things on a smaller scale, I think goes a really long way of helping people feel included and feel heard and seen. I also think it's valuable to escalate things to individual managers or reach out to people, like take that time to actually follow up and check in on someone, how that made them feel. It's also possible you're misinterpreting it. Like, maybe it's not like every single thing is a microaggression. Someone also could be having like a bad day or be tired or whatever. It doesn't always need to come from a place of malicious intent. But I do find so often microaggressions are things that the person doesn't realize would be impactful or offensive to the other person. So um, it's so much, I think, lower stakes for an ally to be able to intervene and provide support versus, the emotional labor and expectation of the individual who's experienced that action constantly, speaking up and advocating for themselves. So I think it's something that I have seen progress in over time. I do think the environments are skewing more inclusive, in particular in those environments that are not walking away or deprioritizing EDI right now. So I do have hope that this is getting better.
Thank you, Vanessa. Julia, did you have a comment?
Yeah, absolutely. One stereotype or microaggression I've really observed in my career is when, women are outspoken in meetings. Some colleagues seem quick to apply labels like aggressive, defensive, even though those same behaviors would generally be considered very positive if it's a man speaking up. As someone who transitioned part of the way through her career, I've seen both sides of this coin, and I know how frustrating it can be to feel like you need to do this balancing act of being outspoken, but not too much. With trans women in particular, some people will even see this as a very male behavior. That's something I've experienced. The unfortunate reality is that these views are misogynistic in nature and rooted in very gendered expectations when it comes to how we present ourselves in the workplace, even if it's not intentional or individuals don't realize their bias. This is really just another example of where allyship is so important, because sometimes people need someone that they can actually relate to a little more to just help recognize this bias and correct that.
Thank you, Julia. So my next question here is for Vanessa. What are some opportunities that exist for demonstration of active allyship in engineering?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've already highlighted in terms of, what active allyship looks like on an individual level, a systemic level, and a workplace force, a workforce level. So What I would like to continue to see in engineering is the organizations that oversee, whether it's Engineers Canada, PEO, OSPE, the organizations that are helping to guide the profession forward, continuing to make EDI as a topic of priority, which I feel confident everyone has been doing thus far. Because as I mentioned earlier, because there's so many different sectors and segments of engineering, it can be difficult to get that sort of um, unified lens. And because in particular, these are the organizations that are really focused on engineering ethics and the connections to licensed engineers. They're working on particularly guiding the technical elements of the engineering profession. I think that element of psychological safety just goes all that step further. Um, so I would love to continue to see, events like these, I think are important to just check in throughout the year, whether it's like bigger conferences or small events that are helping to unify kind of like a national voice, a provincial voice on these subjects. I think this is a great step forward to encourage people to listen in and check in on more of what they could be doing on a day-to-day basis. I really do think it comes down to some elements of just simply treating people kindly. And, I think that can get lost sometimes of like so much of this really comes down to just fundamental respect and open-mindedness to learning about people that are not like you. And I know that I've experienced this in almost the opposite way as well of when somebody has very different beliefs than I do, things that I don't agree with, still keeping that open mind to seeing their humanity and ways we can connect and have shared perspective. So I think that is so foundational in allyship, because so often that you're an ally to something that you're not a part of. So you need to, in some ways, do your own research, but in some ways just kind of keep that general open spirit of how can you on that day-to-day basis when you're, I think Jove said it earlier, when you're observing certain behavior, how can you take that position of privilege that you have and speak up, whether publicly or privately, to help advocate that these folks deserve to have as much say and perspective as everyone else in a contributing space.
Thank you so much. I think, there are a couple of things that you said that I think are very salient points. It's a day-to-day allyship. I think I worry sometimes with the events that pop up during Pride Month that people feel like that's the only time that they have to be allies to us. And I think that allyship is every day. It shouldn't just be a month in a year.
100%.
Yeah, I think that supporting your coworkers constantly, I think is
Yeah.
is an important thing.
I
Um,
so
all of
agree with
us.
that. I think that there can be this sentiment of, oh, I did this one action or this one protest or whatever, and it's great to see those passionate moments in time, but it truly comes down to the consistency, doing a little bit over a long period of time. I think can go even farther for the impact that you're making on that individual person.
Yeah. So, Tim, I have a question for you. What have you learned about allyship through your personal experiences?
Oh my goodness, where shall I start? Um, I could come at this from so many different perspectives, from being an engineer, from being an educator. What everyone doesn't know is formerly I was a professor and an associate dean at a university. And also as a family person, I have a trans person in my family. And so looking at this from different perspectives, I think that what I have learned more than anything else is first and foremost is to listen and to let the person who I'm with be heard. And Vanessa's absolutely right. It's having those quiet, private spaces in which to do that. And that's something I learned very much very early on in education, where I was responsible for several thousand students in an engineering community. And students would come to my office and there would be emotion, there would be tears on both sides. And I'm a very emotional person. And literally, it was listening to these stories and trying to understand how can I help this person to navigate through this process. And sometimes it was very administrative. It was literally barriers put up. Someone wanted to know, how can I actually be recognized by the institution and change my name to the name I want? And I couldn't believe how difficult that is from an administrative basis. And that was institutional. The institution had no mechanism. And so I would basically, and I would call it, I'm going to go and wage war against the registrar's office. And I did that many times. In fact, at one point I was disinvited to meetings because I went to wage war. And it was about having that active, courageous voice for those that literally were scared to even try and broach the subject. And I would never want to put them in harm's way. And so I learned very early on that being an ally is about holding those around you accountable. And I see that as engineering. And that's something I see for our regulators in engineering. So the regulator members of Engineers Canada, the 12 regulators, I think we should be holding our engineers and the companies that they work for accountable. And we need to find a mechanism to do that. It's going to be a very difficult road to travel and to try and navigate. But I think there is definitely a power in holding people accountable within their profession. And that's something we don't have, I don't think, anywhere in the world, and something that's very difficult to navigate. I take great stock from one of my friends, and please look him up. His name is Neil Giuliano. He was the first openly gay mayor in the US in Tempe, in Arizona. And he actually announced his status during his campaign. And the opposing party demanded that it be vetoed and the campaign be run again, at which point he had very little money. He landslided it with a victory. So that tells me, when you tell your story, when you actually are courageous enough to find those to support you around you, to help you navigate that process, you can be successful. He now runs a not-for-profit funding agency for those within the Two-Spirit LGBTQAI plus community to be able to run for public office in the US at this time when DEI is under attack in the US. And to me, that is someone that we should look to as evidence that there are ways in which we can navigate through this and see those opportunities to be good allies. And so I always take great stock from people around me, and I always listen and look for other opportunities. One thing that I've found that probably is my greatest weapon myself, and I do call it a weapon, is who I look like. I am probably, and I sound like, the most colonial, bald, white, old guy you will ever see. But it does mean I can walk into industry and boardrooms and talk to other old, bald, white guys and tell them why they're doing it wrong. And so that is basically the way in which I've approached many of my conversations, is to literally hit it head on and say, I look like you, but I don't think like you. And why is it you don't think like me? And so challenging individuals and finding ways in which we can now push the envelope to actually enhance those opportunities for those within our community, I think is so important. It is another level of courage to be able to do that. And so if I can help individuals to find that courage, I'm going to still be trying to do this, for many years to come. Within my own family, I have a family member who struggles through some of the administrative processes they have to navigate, and struggling through their own direction in an environment where the LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit AI community is not as welcome as it should be. And so when we see those things within our own personal family, we take it to heart. And as a father, it's difficult, because I want to be able to stand up and say, okay, I'm there to protect you. But I have to learn that my child is now an adult, and I have to stand back and let them find their own pathway. And so that's hard, but I think that's also part of the process, is helping individuals, is showing them the pathway, actually helping them to navigate a little bit, but then it has to be the individual walking the path as well. I think that is very, very important, because that's how we perpetuate the courage within our community.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's great. And like, I think it reminds me of my experience being elected to the board of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. I was the first. I've been openly queer and trans in the trades for a few years now, and I talk about that very openly. When I got elected, the ED of the organization at that time, she saw me and she understood how the board was made up. And her active allyship at that point was, okay, well, before we have our first board meeting with your attendance, where I'm going to make all of my board directors do professional development through Pride at Work, and we're going to cover things like sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression, because I want to make sure that everyone else is on the same page about those things before they have to meet you, before you enter those spaces, and she's kind of trying to make it so that it's, if not welcome, at least understood, right? And so I think that is that really that active allyship. You need to show up as yourself, and the people around you who are allies will support you in that, rather than ask you to hide pieces of yourself in order to fit in. So I come to the last question for the panel itself, and then we'll head into a Q&A. What's one thing you'd like to leave our audience with? And Julie, I'm gonna start with you.
Absolutely, Jove. So, for me, allyship is all about trust. It means building strong professional relationships with colleagues across communities, doing your best to listen and support them when needed. It means ensuring processes remove any bias that may affect specific employees disproportionately. It's about listening, working to help build understanding between communities, but most importantly, helping to spread that knowledge and understanding to others who do not understand the need for allyship.
That was beautiful. For me, one thing is I had a mentor recently at work a few months ago acknowledge that, he doesn't necessarily follow news or politics super closely, and even he is feeling significantly impacted by everything happening right now. And he made a comment to me like, I can't even imagine what you're going through being someone who's so closely connected and passionate about these topics. So what I would leave the audience with is, think it is reasonable to have a base assumption right now that almost all queer, trans, marginalized folks have been going through a particularly uniquely difficult time the last few months. Regardless of what's been happening, queer folks statistically experience higher levels of mental health challenges than other communities. So I think extending an additional level of grace, an additional level of checking in on individual people, this is really the time to do it. And maybe if you're noticing someone being a bit quieter or a bit more reserved than normal, trying to help create a space where they can be a bit more themselves, and facilitate that, encourage that as much as you can. And I always say in any of these sorts of spaces that everyone as an individual has a wide variety and range of unique power. And it is about finding the unique space that you can influence. Not every person needs to create an organization or create an ERG or, lead a protest or whatever. It's important for you to just reflect on what you do have control over, what tables you are sitting at, which people you have access to individually, and to leverage that existing network and your existing skills to be able to support others and help advocate for this general cause.
I think that was very well said. Honestly, I'm not sure I can add anything. I mean, you've all said it all. I'm a little bit of a loss here. What I can add, I think that the only thing I'd probably add is, try and be courageous. I know it's difficult, and look for those opportunities to take action, to make change. And whether it is a gathering of individuals within an organization, just to start talking and to find if there are opportunities with a manager or a leader within that organization to help change the employer and change the direction. It's difficult. It's definitely a very difficult thing to navigate. Certainly look out for those great organizations that we have in our community within Canada, PFLAG Canada, as an example. I mean, look for those organizations, look for those people like Neil Giuliano that are inspirational, see how they're actually managing in places where it's most difficult, such as the US. And take stock that, you know, maybe we can do something at a lesser extent, a little slower, a little more thoughtful, and with open ears to be able to understand all the challenges that are there before us and find those pathways. For me, it's about creating pathways. And if I can create a pathway to help someone be successful, regardless of their background and from where they're from, that to me is a big win. And if we can start moving in that direction, and I think it does truly mean holding those accountable. And I think those that are in positions of authority, those that are leaders, that are members of boards, that are members of C-suite communities within organizations, this is the time to be courageous and start to make change if it's not within your organization. And look for that supporting information. And honestly, if people want to talk about opportunities and things, experiences that I've had, I'm very willing for anyone within this call to actually contact me. And I'm very happy to always have a discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. What I would like to address and maybe bring up is that the urgency for allyship right now, as multiple of us have said on this call, the time that we are having right now as a queer community, as trans people, as queer people, it is no longer time to sit back and watch what is happening. We need all of our allies to speak up against injustice, against the 2SLGBTQ plus community. We need to be speaking up against, um, you know, things like protests against a SOGI 123 education, against ways in which that the powers that be are trying to rescind some of our rights. We are seeing that in all spaces. You know, it's not just the States. I think a lot of it is happening in Canada as well. In engineering itself also doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, engineering, whatever the struggle is in engineering is happening in also other industries, in set industries, but in society as a general. And I think more than anything now, really, we need allies to speak up. We need allies to say this is not okay, because we've been saying this is not okay for a long time and no one really listens to us. So, you know, we need the people, we need that safety in numbers, we need that kind of community around us. And so we have a few questions here for our Q&A, and I recognize we run a little bit over, so we're gonna try to keep it short. I maybe will ask 2 questions and we'll try to speed through it. Okay, so the first question, and I'm sure all of us have experienced this at some point in our careers. How can someone navigate the difficult feeling that they were hired to fulfill a company's DEI goals, but aren't truly being included, empowered, or developed beyond the checkbox? What advice do you have for approaching an employer about this perception?
I feel very strongly about this issue. Like, you just have to realize why you're feeling that is all the systems around you telling you you should be feeling that, and it's just not real. It's not real. It's not true. I would recommend looking up a lot about imposter syndrome. For me, I unlocked my technical engineering confidence the more I really sat with the fact that I, on paper, have accomplished XYZ. I got my engineering degree. I have my P.Eng. There's no reason that I should feel technically inferior. There is just accepting the reality of you don't know what you don't know, and you can learn a certain skill set. If you're struggling with that skill set, maybe you need to learn in a different way or need more time. That does not mean you were just hired to fill a quota because you're struggling to execute certain things in your role. It's normal, it's real. Not everyone is perfect at everything. So having that self-confidence that you're there for a reason. And as someone who's done a lot of hiring, there are no two people who are ever identically matched, ever, ever, ever. It's impossible. Everyone has such different perspectives and backgrounds that there's not a carbon copy of you that's a straight white guy that didn't get hired for that sole reason. So just really work on the internalized side, and all this conversation we've been having about allyship in general for the workforce side, this is an example of where we need the allies to come in and help the systemic things that you're experiencing around you that are contributing to you feeling this way and feeling like your technical competence is insufficient. That's where we need those allies to really come in and catch those moments and speak up for you, and you hopefully advocating to your manager, your leadership, your HR, someone you feel comfortable with when you experience specific issues. That would be my biggest recommendation. But you're there for a reason. It's not real, I promise.
I would agree. I think, one thing that you can take stock in is if you find yourself in that position, you're not alone in that organization. There are others that are feeling the same way. Seek them out, find them. There is strength in numbers. And then as a collective, you have basically the makings of an advocacy group within your own organization. And that's how you start to draw other people into allyship. I think this is an opportunity. So if it feels like it's going the wrong way, if you have made that step to join that organization, and for you technically and professionally, it's the right organization, but culturally it's wrong, this is an opportunity. And I think you start with seeking out those individuals, and there will be others. It will not just be you. Find them and actually start having those conversations together. And you'll suddenly find you have common ground to have conversations with more senior people in the organization.
Thank you so much. And then last question, and I think this is a very salient question that I think some of us have addressed in part. What kinds of systemic change should allies be pushing for and normalizing in engineering workplaces and regulators?
I think the obvious one is challenging the inequities. Is there a pay inequity within the organization, which is always the biggest flag between female identifying, male identifying individuals? That always seems to be the biggest thing. Can that be identified? Is there a discussion to be had with the manager over this? Because that is now, I would say, in almost all our jurisdictions across Canada, illegal. So we need to find ways to tackle that head on. And that is, I won't say it's an easy win, but it is a tangible win that the law is behind you immediately. And so you can draw on that. And if necessary, seek legal counsel. Obviously, if you're seeking legal counsel, it may sour the relationship in the organization, but you may be creating a win as a group. And so that might be something that is something tangible to look at. I would say looking for those opportunities to actually create allyship organization within a company is very important. I think that's something you can build on. I think trying to find those opportunities that help you individually, and as we've said throughout this discussion today, this is personal. It is not, it's not business. This is personal, and so it doesn't come more personal than affecting someone's individual identity in their community.
Mhm.
So how can we capture that and capture that emotion and bring it to the attention of someone in the organization to make change? I think those, again, these are opportunities. And I think we almost have to turn the table and see this as an opportunity to be able to advance things forward for ourselves.
Mhm. So I'm just cognizant of the time. I think I will just add a note about that last question, and then we'll probably end this panel there. I think that when it comes to systemic change, policy. So like, what is the policy in your workplace around things that impact the 2S LGBTQ plus community? For example, and this is coming from my personal experience of transitioning on the job site or in the workplace. What is the company's policy for gender affirming care? What is your company's policy for if I have to take time off for gender affirming care, how am I being compensated, right? Like I think, I struggled a lot with that when I was working, because the company was like, well, we don't cover that under our disability plan because it's short term, so we have to lay you off so that you can get EI, which is a whole rigmarole, right? Like I think there needs to be policies in place that support some of these things if you are really talking about active allyship and systemic change within that. So I think, your policies in your workplace, but also how you implement those policies and how you tell your employees about those policies. So with that, I just want to thank Julia, Vanessa, and Tim for joining me today on this panel. Great conversation, very riveting information, I think very salient conversation, a very important conversation to have during Pride Month, but also important to have all year round. I want to thank the audience for joining us today, and I want to turn the time over to Jeanette Southwood for closing remarks.
Thank you, Jove, and hello, everyone. My name is Jeanette Southwood. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I'm the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at EngiQueers Canada, and I'm an engineer myself. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude and appreciation on behalf of EngiQueers Canada to Jove for moderating today's discussion, and to Julia, Tim, and Vanessa for joining us today as panelists and sharing your experiences, your insights, and your perspectives with us. This was an incredibly valuable discussion as we mark Pride Month and as we strive to create a more inclusive engineering profession, particularly during these times. I'd also like to express our gratitude to TD Insurance for sponsoring today's webinar and for their sponsorship of our 30 by 30 conference last month. TD Insurance is a valuable partner for EngiQueers Canada, and we appreciate their support of our equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. TD Insurance is a trailblazer in this area. And thank you also to our audience. Thank you for participating today. Thank you for your questions, to each and every one of you, and also for celebrating Pride with us and for demonstrating your commitment to making our workplaces in the engineering profession more inclusive for 2SLGBTQI+ people. At EngiQueers Canada, we know the value that diverse perspectives bring to our engineering profession. Given our role as engineers in our communities, it is incredibly important that engineers not only reflect the communities we serve, but that we also, and this is so incredibly important, that we truly serve the entire community through our work, our designs, and our engineering solutions. It is for this reason that EngiQueers Canada has been and continues to be committed to realizing a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive profession. This work has been and remains one of our strategic priorities at EngiQueers Canada. Conversations like the one that we've just heard today are important in making all of us in engineering reflect on our own contributions to making engineering a more inclusive profession. So thank you, Jove, Julia, Tim, and Vanessa. Thank you to our audience, and happy Pride, everyone. Take care. All the best.